What I want to show you is how you can use the results of a Google form both inside and outside the classroom. Just to remind you here, this is a Google form that I've created where I'm collecting names, which period my student is in, and then I'm doing some questions here on the distributive property and collecting like terms. These are multiple choice questions. Here I have one with checkboxes, mark all that apply. And then down at the very bottom, I've got a short answer where students can type in some text. If I look up here at the very top, I can see I've got 4 responses. And what I'm about to do is show you what I do in my classroom, inside my classroom, after we've got responses to my Google form. And the first thing I need to do is just click here where it says responses. You can see that what it's doing is it's telling me about all the students who have responded so far. Please note that it's got these email addresses and usernames first. That's because I required this form to collect information from my students, specifically their ridgewoodraters.com account, because we're a Google Apps for Education school. Now, all of these are the same because I just used the test student account to answer this several times. But when you do this and you're collecting that information, you'll be seeing different email addresses up here. And you'll also be seeing first and last names as students type these in. These are pretty close to live updating. So what will usually happen is if you're showing this while students are in class submitting the Google form, they should see their name pop up. Please be aware that if these lists get long enough, there'll be a scroll bar over here on the side that you have to scroll through to find different names. So I've got my names, I know which periods my students are from, and here's my first question, and I'm really happy. Look at this, the correct answer is 3x. 100% of my students got this. We're good to go on this. I'm happy. But if I look at the next question, we've got some issues here. Only 50% of the students got this one correct, so I know this is a problem where we need to stop, slow down, and review. One thing that's important on both of these, please note that the Google form doesn't tell you which answer is correct. That's your job as a teacher. So you're going to have to say, wait a minute, our correct answer right here is the one in red. Why is that correct? Remember that our next question was something where we wanted to see checkboxes. And I'm very pleased that x plus x plus 4, one of the correct answers, got 100% of the responses. But it looks like I'm going to have to work on the distributive property with some of my students. Now, I want to show you something about checkbox questions. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to change that question. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to one of the answers right here and add some text after it. It doesn't really matter what the text is, which is why I'm just saying blah, blah, blah. I just want to add that, and I want to look at those responses again. Notice something. Your answer for a checkbox question may be cut off after a while. You can scroll over it, or actually mouse over it and see the entire thing. But just be aware of this, that sometimes, you don't see the full response that you want to see because there's so limited space here. The last thing I need to do is I need to look at the answers to my constructed response question. So I asked, how can you remember the distributive property? And I've got one student who gave me the distributive property, one student who wasn't really sure, one student who wants to just give me a joke answer, and one student who says, really, we need to review this. This is what I do inside my class when I go over a Google form. And you might notice one of the problems that I have right here is that students can just submit silly things, or even worse, profanity. You do have to be careful about this. And that's not going to be stopped by the Google form. And you're going to have students who have questions, and you're not going to know which student asked which question. So now that we've looked about how we see things inside the classroom, let's talk about addressing some of these issues by looking at this data outside of the classroom. And to do that, let's scroll up. Remember that we created a spreadsheet that collected all this information. And what I'm going to do is click on this icon right here and bring up that spreadsheet. Notice what's collected. I know exactly when students submitted their answers by looking at the timestamp. I can see their ridgewoodraters.com email address. Now again, all of these are the same because I use the test student account in this case. It can be important to look at the names submitted first and last and compare them to the username. Sometimes you'll see a discrepancy because somebody's making a joke. They logged in and they wanted to put in a silly name. But sometimes you'll see a discrepancy because the previous person didn't log out, somebody else didn't log in and just submitted the Google form again, and you need to know that can happen. That maybe confused student here picked up an iPad where somebody hadn't logged out and just submitted the form. So you'll see a discrepancy between the username and the information there. But here's the nice thing. Here's all the information. Here's what they answered to the first question and the second question. Look how with checkboxes we see the two answers that they submitted, and there are their short answers. So now I know, for example, who submitted the haha and who asked, can we review this? Please note that there's some nice things that you can do because this is a Google Sheet. Of course, anything that I want to do with a spreadsheet, I can do with this. So for example, if what I want to do is sort this, and I'd like to sort it, say, by period, and then by last name, I can do that. So all of my period 1 students are there first, and then my period 2 students. And I will often do this with the data, so I can see who answered and who didn't answer for things like participation. Now, again, I keep on emphasizing this. This is data. It's not telling you who got the correct answers. If you're really interested in trying to figure out what students' scores should be, there is an add-on to Google Sheets called Flubberoo that I don't use myself, but other people do, and it can actually score these responses for you. Now, this is how I use this data outside of the classroom. Before we stop, let me go back to the form and show you one thing. Suppose I've collected this data during my first period class, and here are the responses, and we've talked about them, and we've learned, and yay, people understand better. Well, I don't want all of these responses up for my next period. And one thing you can do is click over where the 3 dots are and delete all responses. Now I'm going to bring up the little dialog box here just to emphasize something. It's going to ask you, are you sure that you want to delete all form responses? This action cannot be undone. Really scary. But look at this. Responses already sent to a spreadsheet will not be deleted. So if I say OK to this, I'm doing 2 things. So let me say OK, and let me show you what's going on. I am clearing this, so the next class that comes in, I will just see their data, not the data from a previous class. But I can still go back to my spreadsheet and see everything saved. So there you have it. Once you've created a Google form and sent it out to your students, we've just reviewed how you can look at that Google form both inside and outside of the classroom.